We have talked about one existentialist philosopher so far, and that's Martin Heidegger. I want to talk about two more now in this lesson. And the first one, and both of these are famous names. The first one is a man named Jean-Paul Sartre. You can see by the dates of his life that we're well into the 20th century now. Sartre was French, and Sartre was an atheist. This will color some of his views of things. Sartre is probably the figure most responsible for making existentialism widely known. We're going to start. Sartre provides an unusual account of the nature of our consciousness. To Sartre, consciousness is a dynamic field that is continually at work. And Sartre says that consciousness is always intentional. That means it's always directed at something. So it would be accurate to say, from Sartre's perspective, we are not conscious as humans. We are only conscious of something. Consciousness has no particular nature. It takes on the nature of whatever it is directed toward. Sartre says there is no ego or anything that serves as the foundation and source of our consciousness. We have no essence. You can see how different that is from Plato. There is no such thing. Sartre says there is no such thing as human nature. There's nothing that we all have in common. There's no fixed nature. We are, and would be a fairly famous word from Sartre, we are a type of nothingness. And I will explain more about that. Our consciousness shifts and changes its focus. We become aware that we can take up stances as we choose. The projects that we choose to pursue make us who we are. And I will give you a famous formulation by Sartre right now. He's talking about something the existentialists have in common. He says they believe that existence comes before essence. Existence comes before essence. See, this is different. Once again, I refer you to Plato. Plato said the essence has to be there first, the form or the idea. Sartre says no. And he's going to explain this idea this way. What do we mean by saying that existence precedes essence? We mean that man, first of all, exists, encounters himself, surges up in the world, and defines himself afterwards. If man, as the existentialist sees him, is not definable, it is because to begin with he is nothing. He will not be anything until later, and then he will be what he makes of himself. Thus there is no human nature, because there is no God to have a conception of it. I told you he was an atheist. Man simply is. And I'll put it this way. Man is nothing else but that which he makes of himself. This is the first principle of existentialism. So these are basic ideas of Sartre. Plato said, essence precedes existence. The pattern, the form has to be there first before anything can exist. The existentialists would say, this is true in most areas, but it's not true of human character. We exist first, then we make ourselves who we are. And we do this by our choices. This is a big word for the existentialists. We define ourselves by the choices that we make in our lives. We are characterized by radical freedom. And radical, of course, means extreme. We are free to direct our consciousness any way we choose, even if by default. To not choose is itself a type of choice. Sartre claims this freedom with no fixed foundations to justify our decisions creates anxiety for us. We're a little close to, I remember Heidegger's word angst, which meant anxiety. And so you can see that Sartre is saying something very, very similar here. Anxiety is fundamental to human beings, and it is a basic reaction to our radical freedom. And let me read again what Sartre has to say about our predicament. Sartre says, man is condemned to be free. We are here. Man is condemned to be free. We make attempts to escape our freedom and its attendant anxiety by believing that we have a fixed nature and that what we do follows from this fixed nature. But Sartre says this is self-deception. We must embrace our freedom courageously. We must take responsibility for our choices, even though we have nothing to guide us. There are no fixed principles or values. Sartre's view of our relationship with other people is not a particularly attractive one either, if you don't find this particularly optimistic. Sartre says everyone defines himself or herself by his or her pursuits, by the focus of consciousness. There's no shared human nature. Our interests and pursuits inevitably collide with those of others. We are fundamentally separated from each other. We suffer from what Sartre would call alienation. We are alone in the world. And he extends his account of interpersonal relations to love. He says no deep connections are possible between human beings. So there's not going to be any deep love shared between two human beings. And he says little compromises are the best that we can do in our relationships with other people.